pleasure. Thank you very much, Georgina and Tyrone, for inviting me here. I do have a slide presentation to help everybody follow what I'll be speaking about. Let's see if we can get that on screen. Sharing screen. Let's see if that works. Can you see that?
Yes, I can see it just fine, David.
All right. So again, thank you both for inviting me to join you today. I'm a U.S. immigration lawyer. I specialize in the EB-5 immigrant investor visa to the U.S. I'll go on to see if I can advance my presentation. I've actually lived and worked in Asia since 1993, so coming on about 28 years. Most of that time I've lived in Taipei, Taiwan. I've also lived in Hong Kong and in Vietnam. I have offices in Taipei, Ho Chi Minh City, and Manila. Perhaps someday we'll expand to Jakarta, we'll see. And as I mentioned, I specialize in EB-5. Probably about going on about 12 years now. I've represented hundreds of investors to immigrate to the US through the EB-5 investor visa program. And so today I'm going to focus on some recent changes to the EB-5 program that you may have heard about. And I hope we'll have some time at some point, maybe the end of the presentation, if anybody has any specific questions. So as an outline for what I'll cover today, this is the outline. I'll just give you some basics to qualify for EB-5, a quick history so you understand where it's been and where we are now, the regional center program status, a summary of changes, and then now only what we call direct EB-5 is available, and I'll explain that. And then what is a qualifying business, and then the source of funds used for your investment in order to qualify for EB-5. So we'll start with the basics, and these are the basics. In order to qualify for the EB-5 visa, these are the main criteria, and they're relatively simple. An investor would invest $500,000, $500,000, or $1 million into a new commercial enterprise, and through that investment creates at least 10 new full-time jobs for US workers, and the investor should somehow be involved in the management of the business. And those are the basic requirements. There really isn't much more to qualifying. There's no education requirement. There's no business experience requirement. There's no language requirement. So you may not speak any English at all, and you can still qualify for EB-5. Now, a couple of these items you may be curious about it. You know, I see everyone asks, it says invest 500,000 or 100,000, and then it says reduce from 900,000 and 1.8 million. I'll cover the reason why it's reduced a little bit later, but the question is why are there two different amounts? Well, the original amount is the higher amount. The standard investment amount is now $1 million. But if you make your investment into a special area called a targeted employment area, which is an area in which the US government wants to focus investment for job creation or job growth, then you can qualify for the $500,000 investment amount. And these are all over the US. Even in some large cities, you can find areas that can be designated as a targeted employment area and qualify for the lower investment amount. Also rural areas outside major cities or metropolitan areas in the countryside areas will qualify for a lower investment amount. And the other question about involved in the management of the business, typically under the EB-5 law, if you're a limited partner of a partnership or you're a member of a limited liability company, and as long as you have certain rights and powers as such a member or a partner, then you qualify as being involved in the management. It doesn't mean you have to be there and manage the day-to-day operations of the business. you're just a partner, and you do have some high level decision making ability with the company. So most people that want to immigrate through the EB-5 visa, they don't want to go there and run a business like a restaurant, for example. They just want to own it and kind of be the boss and tell managers, what to do. So in a sense, so you don't really need to be that involved. Now I'll move on to the next, the history of EB-5. So you know where we are today. The EB-5 visa category was passed in 1990. And at that time, the basic requirement was you set up a business and you hire 10 people and you invest the minimum amount of money. But back then, it was quickly realized that an amount of $500,000 is pretty difficult if you're going to hire 10 workers in the US and then operate a business. It really may not be enough money, so it wasn't really practical. Also, it limited the types of businesses that could be involved because of the job creation requirement. So in 1993, Congress passed the Immigrant Investor Pilot Program. That's referred to generally as the Regional Center Program, and that's what the common term is now. So we'll call it the Regional Center Program. So that was passed in 1993. It was a pilot program, pilot meaning a test program. And this was passed originally for 5 years. Now, the Regional Center Program has regularly been extended from time to time since 1993. It used to be extended for 5 years, then it dropped to 3 years, and then around 2015, it began to become extended several times during the year. And then finally late last year, in late 2020, it was extended until June 30, 2021, and it was not extended past that date. So as of right now, the Regional Center Program was not extended, so it's expired. Now, what was the advantage of the Regional Center Program? If you look on this slide, point 3, the main advantage of the program is that investors investing into new commercial enterprises that are sponsored by a regional center can count both direct and indirect job creation. Now, the direct job creation, that's people who actually work for the business. But the indirect job creation is jobs that are created in the community because of that business. Most of the jobs that are indirect jobs in an EB-5 project sponsored by a regional center that are indirect are created through the economic investment and economic activity of the business. So, for example, if there's a project that's building a commercial building in an area, then maybe that building, the total investment and development cost are $50 million. There's a lot of money going into that area, and that creates a lot of jobs just because of the infusion of the capital, the cash in the area. Now, none of the workers are direct employees. But you think about the construction workers coming in, as contractors, and all the different jobs that are created because of that activity. Now, this was acceptable. This is part of the law. That's what the Regional Center Program advantage was, is the indirect job creation, because you create a lot more jobs indirectly than you would directly. Now, the Regional Center Program, as I said, has expired and is no longer available. So what happened recently? This is a summary of the recent changes. So back in November 2019, Immigration Service passed new regulations governing the EB-5 program, and those regulations increased the investment amounts to $1.8 million or $900,000 if in a targeted employment area. And it also changed the way these special areas, these targeted employment areas, can be determined. Originally, they were determined by the state governments, but now Immigration Service wanted to take that control back to kind of better control what can be qualified as a targeted employment area. a regional center called Bering Regional Centers sued the US government. They sued the DHS, which is the Department of Homeland Security. And a federal judge ruled in their favor in early June this year. They ruled that the regulations were implemented unlawfully. I won't go into the details of why and how, but it was a very strong opinion by the judge, and it was really based on good facts of the case, so that the judge threw out the regulations. That reverted us back to the pre-November 2019 regulations, which meant that the minimum investment amount dropped back to $500,000 or $1 million, which is where we are now. It also went back to the old targeted employment area rules, which are actually, they're more favorable for investors because it allows developers that want, or investors themselves that want to set up businesses, a lot more flexibility in the areas where they want to set up a business and qualify. Right. So that's what happened from the federal court case. The most important being the reduction of the investment amount back to 500,000. The second event that happened, I mentioned, was the regional center program expired on June 30, 2021, just three and a half months ago. Now, this means that investments sponsored by regional centers can no longer count indirect job creation. And this means that there's no more the ability to take advantage of the additional jobs created. So you have to hire people directly in the business. That's this next slide. I'm summarizing that. Investors now must show that the business has directly created 10 jobs for US workers. So they actually work in the business. Now, this does create a few more challenges to investors because of the job creation. Most of the regional center sponsored businesses really had very few workers because they're relying on all the indirect jobs. And the model for that program was that a company would organize a special purpose entity to raise money from EB-5 investors and loan that to a target project. So that entity actually didn't create any direct jobs, but they had credit for the jobs created by the borrower of their money. Then after a period of time, after that loan period passed, then the borrower would repay back the loan to the special purpose entity, and then they could pay back the EB-5 investors. And that was their exit strategy on how you as an investor could receive back your investment. That's a lot more difficult now to arrange because loaning to another entity typically doesn't qualify in a direct EB-5 model, right? So now you have to hire people directly, and so certain types of businesses do hire a lot of people. My favorite example is a national food service chain like McDonald's or Burger King. Whereas, let's say you have a franchise owner that wants to open a new shop and wants to bring in, somebody else as an investor. That location is probably going to easily hire 10 or more workers. Now, those aren't as simple to be involved in as an investment. As a partner, but that is restaurants are pretty obvious examples of creation of jobs, so enough jobs. But many other businesses can still qualify. The key is that these are people that are actually working for the business, right? They have the Internal Revenue Service documentation shows that they're on the payroll. They follow what's called a W-2 in the US for their tax filing purposes and documentation like that. Now, it's also at the very last point here on this slide is that jobs can be created over time, about 2.5 years from the petition approval. The petition is the first application you file. with Immigration Service if you want to pursue the EB-5 visa process. You don't have to create the jobs immediately. They can be added to the business over time as the business grows. And I will take a moment here to also mention, that you can, and under the EB-5, well, the next slide is, point 2 is an investor may own and operate her or his own business and run the business themselves. You could do this on your own. You could go to the US and set up a business and hire 10 people and run the business, or hire a manager to run the business, and then just by yourself. Or you can invest with others. So you can invest into an existing business that's been actually designed to accept EB-5 investors and qualify you for the visa. Or you could go in with a partner that and go to the US and set up and run your own business. So it's flexible that way, but it has to be a for-profit business. Passive investments, such if you set up a business and you just buy stock or you just buy land, they won't qualify, mainly because you don't create jobs when you set up that type of business. That's more of a passive investment business. So keep that in mind. So there are businesses that just as before, when the Regional Center program was available, those target businesses were designed to accept EB-5 investors to qualify for visas. The same is true for a direct EB-5 business. There are businesses that set themselves up and allow and accept EB-5 investors so that they can also qualify. It's there's not as many now because most people focused on the Regional Center program qualified business. So the direct businesses, there aren't as many, and they're a little more difficult to arrange. But once they're organized and modeled, then an investor has a strong probability of qualifying for the visa. So now, as an investor, if you're thinking about EB-5, the most important requirement, as I said, is investing the minimum investment amount of $500,000. And the requirement is that the money you use for the investment must be able to prove that you obtained it lawfully. We call this the lawful source of funds. And so that's the biggest challenge for most investors. And that's where, if there were, this is the most critical aspect as an investor. And Immigration Service is very strict on reviewing and the capital and where it came from. So it can come from any source. It come from salary income, come from your investments. It can come from a gift. So it's pretty common that a gift from a family member to another family member, for example, parents to children, so that they can invest and immigrate. And even like a lottery, some countries have a lottery, like a national lottery. If you buy a lottery ticket and win, that's money you lawfully obtain through the lottery system. Now, as an example of this, probably about 70% of my investors will liquidate money from a property that they've owned for some time. So maybe they bought an apartment or a house 10, 15 years ago, and they want to get a mortgage from a bank and use that loan money to invest, which is fine. Or maybe they want to sell the property and use that money to invest. But we have to be able to demonstrate how they came by the property. How did they buy the house or the apartment? How did they have the money 10 or 15 years ago? And this is when it can become a little bit challenging, but we're quite good at it, actually, establishing that, because most people, they did work hard and they obtained that money, and they made a down payment and paid off a loan, for example, or maybe an inheritance from a family member years ago. So that's the most common use or way to source the money for the investment. That's the basics of of EB-5 I wanted to introduce. Now, one thing that we have that I did not talk about, I believe Tyrone is going to explain, is the expedited processing of an investor petition. And if Tyrone doesn't, I will talk about that later. I'm happy to. But that is an option that is available and is sometimes used for certain investors investing in certain types of projects. So thank you very much for a few minutes here to give you the basics of EB-5. And as I said, I'd be happy to I'll be here and answer any questions if there's a time for Q&A later.
Okay, thank you, David, for the presentation. And let's continue with our second speaker, Tyrone. Tyrone,
Hi.
the time is yours.
Okay, great. Let me just bring up my presentation quickly. Okay. Excuse me. All right, I'm going to ask everybody if they can see my screen. It should have a big Statue of Liberty, a photo of New York City.
Yes, it's great. It's great, Tyrone.
Okay, good. I just always like to ask. Okay, well, great. Thanks, Georgina, for helping organize this event today. And David, thank you very much for that nice introduction to the history of the EB-5 program. It's a very nice summary to bring us up to the current status of the program. So my name's Tyrone. I'm an immigration consultant. I've been working in the EB-5 business and industry since 2008. My company, Pearl Bay, we have offices in China, Hong Kong, Vietnam, Cambodia, and strategic partners all around the world. So today I want to talk about a new project that we're promoting. It's a direct EB-5 project that David talked quite a bit about. And so it does qualify under the current regulations. But before I do that, I want to talk a bit about what benefits you get from getting an EB-5 green card. And some of the services that we will also provide to you to help you through the process. So a lot of times people ask, oh, okay, yes, I want to move to America. How do I move to America? And then you say, oh, and they'll say, I want a green card. But oftentimes there's not a lot of understanding what a green card is. And a green card is, to put it quite simply, it's permanent residency in the US, and permanent residency allows you to live in the US, work in the US, invest in the US. It allows your children to go to school in public schools for free. At university level, they can receive local tuition as well as government student loans for your children. And in many ways, it gives you most of the same rights as a US citizen outside of being able to vote. Of course, if you've seen some of the people we've had to vote for president in the recent years, you're not missing too much. But if you do decide that you do want to vote for president someday, the permanent residency, the EB-5 green card, is also a pathway to US citizenship. So it typically takes about 5 years from the time you first receive your permanent residency until you can apply for citizenship. If you do want to apply for citizenship, there are some in-country stay requirements. Approximately 2.5 years you have to live in the US. But with just the permanent residency itself, it's really quite a flexible, immigration document. Because as David pointed out, you don't necessarily, have to be directly involved with the day-to-day operations of a business. Even with direct EB-5, where there's you do have to be somewhat involved. I mean, it's much more passive. There's not a lot of requirements. There's no English language requirements. There's no education requirements. And as David pointed out so nicely, it's really just showing where you got the $500,000 from and showing that you got it there legally. And then as far as who can benefit from this from permanent residency in the U.S. and from your EB-5 petition. It's your spouse, and I should say that the U.S. does allow same-sex marriages, and I think David is one of the pioneers of helping same-sex couples get to the U.S. So I mean that is it's a concern for some people, or it's an interesting option for some people. There's, as far as the other requirements, again, it's basically having $500,000. Although there's no official requirement for the number of days you have to spend in the U.S. And David might want to follow up on this a little bit, but you are required to show an intent to be a permanent resident there, which you should spend time in the U.S. You should be traveling there quite often, and probably buy a house, and your children can go to school there. So it's very important that you should establish an intent for permanent residency. However, if you found yourself in a situation where you were not able to travel there for some time, then it is possible to work with David and to notify the U.S. Immigration Services that you're going to be occupied maybe with a job or with some business overseas for a period of time. So make notice of that. So it's a very flexible program, and now more than ever, it's an opportunity to get approved very quickly. Again, it's great that we have the $500,000 option again, but typically it takes about 2 to 3 years to get your initial EB-5 approval, to get what's called the I-526 approved. So it was taking about 2 or 3 years, but our partners with our current project have what's is called an expedited project. So what this means is that your application, working with David, you'll apply for expedited processing, which to kind of put in, I guess in simple terms, is a fast track, processing time. The reason we will do that is because this project was originally approved as a regional center project, and the U.S. Immigration Services did give it a special status. It said, this project is so important to U.S. society. It's of national importance that we will consider your petition, before others. Basically, you get to jump to the front of the line. And so with that, whereas with most projects, you might be looking at 2 to 3 year processing time. With this particular project, I think it's reasonable to assume that you could get an approval in less than a year. And of course, there's never 100% guarantee that you can get that expedited processing. But as David said, there's not that many petitions going in right now. So we still believe that the processing time should still be relatively fast. And again, I think I'm confident to say that I think you can expect it in probably less than a year. David already talked about this. Here's a letter saying that the project, what it was as a regional center project, was approved for expedited processing, but that each case will be judged. Each individual will be judged and approved for expedited processing. So let's talk about the project. I think that's kind of what we all want to hear about, because you'll be investing $500,000 into this project, and that's a lot of money, and you want to be certain that it's a secure investment that'll create the jobs necessary, and that you'll get your money back, right? Because this is, you're not buying a green card. You're not buying U.S. citizenship. You're making an investment that is, will grant you permanent residency and perhaps eventual citizenship. And like any investment, you should expect your money back. So your partner on this project will be a company that's overseen by a lady named Kathy Ireland. Kathy Ireland in the 1980s and 1990s was probably one of the most famous fashion models in the US. And since then, she's really kind of grown a very large investment empire. where, or I'm sorry, a very large business empire, which includes, health and wellness, as well as fashion products. So you might say that, she's, not only the face of fashion and beauty, but also of health and wellness. So, and she's become particularly interested in a particular issue in the US today, which is, so move to this slide, which is a drug dependency. So, over the past really 10 years or so, American society has really experienced an epidemic. And in fact, President Trump and President Biden have both declared this a national emergency. What it is that many people who have been hurt on the job, for example, they were working, they hurt their backs, they went to doctors and they were prescribed pain medication. And oftentimes they were overprescribed this medication, and these were very powerful drugs, and they became dependent on this medication, such as opioids. And so this has really become a major issue in the US, and it's something that our partners at Kathy Ireland are trying to address. And you can see here, it is a major issue. Every day, 255 Americans die of a drug overdose. So the idea is that we're going to open up what's called recovery centers for those people, who became dependent on prescription drugs, right? These are not illegal drugs, but drugs that were given to them by doctors, and for certain pain, and then they became dependent. So the idea is that will help them recover from not only their injuries, but also from their dependence on opioids. So we're opening up clinics across the US, recovery centers. Here's an example of a couple that they've opened up recently. They opened up one with the city of Boston. You can see the campus here. This is a very large, very, very large clinic that is in the city of Boston. And then another recent project is they opened up with the West Virginia University. So that they're working with universities also. So, they work with very good partners, usually government authorities, to open up these clinics. And in fact, they plan to open up 200 of these clinics in the next 2 years, if you can imagine that. And so, the government and the US government is very supportive of this project. In fact, the government's going to sponsor and basically pay for 85% of all the patients who enter it. So here's one of the current projects that you'd be investing into. It's located in a city called Morgantown, West Virginia. The state of West Virginia is unfortunately considered the epicenter of the opioid crisis. And you'll actually be investing into 2 different clinics. So one in what's called Charleston, and the other in Morgantown. So here's the 2 clinics. You can see not too far from New York City, but these are smaller cities that don't have these types of services already. And that's why the government is willing to consider expedited processing, because they want these clinics built in these small towns to help people recover. So here's a couple photos here, or some photos of the current clinics in each city. Now, these are going to be expanded considerably, made much larger. There are 2 different types of clinics. One is a day clinic where people just go in and out for treatment and for meetings and for some therapy. And the other one is a long stay clinic where people will, check in for 30 days at a time for their recovery process. So, I'm trying to explain why this project is so important to US society, but I realize that this project is important to you as an investment also. This is not, and so I want to remove the emotion and let's not think about what the project actually is, and just think about the business. Why is this a good business to invest into? Because this is not a charity donation. This is a business investment, and you want to make a good business decision. So as a business, this is quite interesting. You know, our partners have opened up, I might have mentioned, 45 of these clinics already across 23 states in America. So they're very experienced. All the patients who go into these clinics will be paid for. Let's see, I think I have the number. Oops. Okay. 85% will be paid for by government health insurance, what's called Medicaid. 10% will be paid for by insurance, and then 5% will probably use cash. So if we just, again, remove the emotion and not really think about what the business is doing, from a business perspective, it's very good. There's a very big market. There's a need for this service. And then on the other hand, there's a very stable revenue stream from the clients or from the patients because the government's paying for them all. So it really fits together as a very nice business model. You know, you can kind of count on every kind of a full clinic. You know, they've opened up a lot of these clinics that are already at capacity, and everyone inside the clinic, all the patients, are being paid for by the government. So very steady revenue. So it's in that way, it's a very secure investment. And as an investor, like David said, you're not making a loan to this project. As an investor, you're actually investing into the entire project. So you own a share of the company, which owns real estate. So in many ways, you know, like this particular property, I think has 40 rooms in it. It's a long stay clinic. So you can think of it as kind of a small mid-sized hotel with 40 rooms. So that's the sort of real estate that's backing up your investment. Okay, now a little bit about the finances on this particular project. Again, you'll be investing into 2 different clinics, and the total investment amount is $10.7 million. We will have 11 investors, so you'll be joining 10 other investors for a total of $5.5 million in EB-5. There's a bank loan on this project. Also, a bank is loaning money to it. They're loaning $4.9 million, which I think sometimes can give some security to you to know that a bank is making a loan to this project, because the banks do quite a lot of due diligence and background checking, and you know they don't invest into charities. You know, they're there to make a secure loan to the project and to get their money back also. Okay, then onto, you know, probably what is not only getting your money back, but maybe even more important is the job creation. Because the job creation is what's going to get your permanent residency and qualify you for permanent residency. So there's a total of 110 jobs required for everyone to get their initial, to get their, I guess, 829 approved, or to get the conditions removed from their permanent residency and green cards and become permanent residents. So, and it's projected from many case studies that they will create 121 jobs. They're already working to create jobs right now. So, you know, there's a bit of a buffer there. There should be more than enough jobs for all 11 investors. Okay, then finally, a little bit just on the process and the cost of the investment. So the investment is $500,000, and all of that money must go into the business. And you know, they're very careful about putting all $500,000 into the business. You know, they can't use the money to, you know, buy big boats for themselves, or even to give big commissions to agents. All of that $500,000 must go in and be accounted for going into the business. So that being said, for operating costs, they add what's called an administrative fee, which is $60,000 on there for you know, just operational expenses for the EB-5 program itself. You know, to help process your paperwork, to help making sure everything's being filed, and to make sure that the EB-5 program is current. Now, once you send $560,000 US to the US and it's held in an escrow account, that money is held there until you file what's called the I-526 application, you know, working with David. And, you know, once David is comfortable with, the source of funds, and that you put together everything, and you've shown all of your money to be legally obtained, he'll usually probably give you a thumbs up, or maybe not a thumbs up, maybe not quite, maybe something a little more formal, but he will say that it's okay to file the application or the petition, and at that point, then your money is released into the company. It's a requirement that your money be invested in order to receive approval for your 526. Now, in the case that you are denied, which again we do expect some sort of decision on your petition, within a year. The developer will make all best efforts to return your investment and your administrative fee. So, there is a bit of insurance in there. And then as an investment itself, it's typically a 5-year investment. And the investment offers a 0.5% guaranteed return, or 0.5% profit distribution, whichever is greater. So the project is successful and it's making a lot of profit, you'll receive 0.5% of all the profits of the project. And as an incentive to make sure the developer returns your money on time, or at 5 years, I should say. If they don't, then they start paying you 5%, and then you're 6%, and then every year the interest rate increases 7%, 8%. So this is really an incentive for the developer to return your money within 5 years. Okay, I won't spend too much time on that. I'll just hit the highlights of the EB-5 program, and also the Kathy Ireland Recovery Centers, the project itself. So again, with EB-5, I think it's really one of the most flexible immigration programs in the world. I mean, just if you're looking at any country in the world, whether it's Portugal or Greece or Canada, the EB-5 program is very flexible. It allows you to obtain permanent residency for your family fairly quickly. There's very few requirements. Again, no education or language requirements, and it gives you a lot of benefits. I mean, it's you get access to American health care, education, and sometimes as an American, sometimes I forget. You also get access to America. Just opportunity. America really is the land of opportunity. There's if you're interested in business or tech or whatever your interest might be, or America is probably leading the way in many of those areas. So it's a great program in that sense. And then finally, for the investment project itself, you're dealing with a multi-billion-dollar company, who's got a tremendous amount of experience in this industry, working with recovery centers and with these types of clinics. You have the potential to receive expedited processing, and we qualified the 500,000 mark, and that there's incentives for the project to repay you within 5 years. So it works out to be a very nice package. Your family gets permanent residency with a very clear pathway to citizenship, and you should get your money back in about 5 years. Okay, now that was a lot of information, I think. So I think it's time now for you to ask any questions to help us, to let us clarify, either questions, maybe for David about the actual program and the process maybe of EB-5. And then you can ask me any questions about the project and the investment itself. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Tyrone, for the presentation. Before we move to the Q&A, let me recap in Bahasa, if you don't mind, because there are some people who were late in joining this webinar. So, oke, jadi Bapak Ibu, gini ya, jadi EB-5 ini adalah salah satu jenis green card. Ya, kalau Bapak Ibu mungkin sudah sering ya mendengar kata green card. yaitu green card itu adalah izin tinggal sebetulnya ya, izin tinggal di Amerika, di mana dengan green card itu Bapak Ibu bisa mempunyai hak sama seperti warga negara Amerika, baik di sisi pendidikan, mau kerja, mau sekolah, dan kalau mau bekerja juga tidak perlu ada sponsor lagi, mau berbisnis, dan semuanya sama, mendapatkan hak termasuk kesehatan. Hanya bedanya tidak bisa ikut pemilu, bisa ikut milih presiden, itu nggak bisa, jadi tidak punya hak politik, itu aja bedanya. Nah, kemudian dengan EB-5 ini, yang khusus dari EB-5 Direct yang kali ini dipresentasikan adalah minimum 500.000, karena sebelumnya 900.000, tapi sudah dihentikan oleh government per 30 Juni. Dan yang sekarang ini adalah direct. Kenapa disebut direct? Karena direct itu langsung ke proyeknya. Nah, kenapa bisa dipercepat, expedited ya, dipercepat? Karena proyeknya ini adalah proyek khusus, yaitu pusat rehabilitasi narkoba yang dianggap sebagai kepentingan pemerintah gitu, sehingga diberikan izin khusus di mana para investornya itu bisa mendapatkan green card-nya dalam waktu kurang lebih 1 tahun saja, sedangkan untuk biasanya EB-5 yang reguler itu termasuk klien saya sampai 3 tahun ini belum approve, karena tahun lalu karena ini waktu pandemi jadi agak lambat ya, jadi 3 tahun, bisa 2 tahun, 3 tahun. Sedangkan untuk yang expedited ini cuma perlu waktu 1 tahun. Nah, kurang lebih seperti itu. Nah, silakan Bapak Ibu kalau ada pertanyaan bisa langsung verbal. If you have any questions, you can ask verbally to either Tyrone or David. So David will cover questions related to the EB-5 green card, and Tyrone will cover the project. Okay. Or if you want to ask questions in Bahasa, please do so. I will translate.
I have a question for Tyrone and for David. For Tyrone, you were mentioning that the project will be in Charleston and West Virginia, right? And I was just wondering, since David was saying that we have to involve directly in the business, would that mean that we have to stay in West Virginia, or to run the business, or we just let the that person, Kathy, to run the business?
I'm going to maybe make a quick response, then if David wants to add on to that, to give a more nuanced response. So I think the quick answer is no. You're not required to be there for day-to-day operations or to be directly involved in the management of the business. They've got a great professional team that does all of that. So it can be fairly passive, and you're certainly not required to live at your investment or next to your investment. David, do you want to make any comment about, because it is a direct EB-5
Sure. Right. Tyrone, as Tyrone said, that's correct. So you'll be investing as a limited partner or a member of the limited liability company, and just by that status, you're considered qualified as in the management of the business. But you're not going to be involved in the business. The operators that have this vast experience are going to manage the business. And then as an EB-5 investor, you can live wherever you want. You can live in California, New York City, Florida. You don't have to live nearby your investment.
Okay. And all right. And I was just saying, I was just looking at the description of the bank loan and everything. I saw that the bank loan was more than 50% of the whole business. Would that be, would that be promising for for the return of the funds?
Well, I mean, it's how do I want to say it? I think it's fairly typical for most businesses in the U.S. to have bank loans. It's fairly easy to borrow money in the U.S. and the interest rates are quite low. So I think what it does do is it allows them to borrow more money and to operate the business, have more capital to operate the business. So I see it as a benefit for the business overall. And just from kind of a practical point of view, banks do they do due diligence. They look at these businesses and make decisions to loan money. So you can have some confidence here that it's not just foreign EB-5 investors who are invested in this project, but also local banks who know the project very well, who've also decided to invest into the project.
Okay, all right. And okay, thank you. And for David, I have a question. Sorry, for Tyrone. Sorry. You said that we have the ability to leave and enter the US at will. That means we don't have to reside there. But do the US have the at least have a certain length of stay that we have to stay there as a EB-5 program?
I'm going to let
Because
David I'll let David answer this because I think it's a more of a technical legal question, and I always like to hear the explanation also. So,
oh, okay.
Although you've probably heard it dozens of times from me. Right. Well, that's a good question. That's probably one of the most common questions is how long do I have to stay in the US? Do I have to live in the US full time? Everybody's curious about that. So remember, you're becoming a lawful permanent resident of the US. And as a resident, you obtain a green card, which is your identification card. Just as you're a citizen of Indonesia, you have a passport, which identifies you as a citizen. As a permanent resident, the US government has the expectation that you intend to live permanently in the US. And that means that you're going to spend significant amount of time in the US. It doesn't mean you have to stay there all the time. And as Tyrone's slide says, you can freely come and go. You can leave the US and return freely, as long as you continue to maintain your resident intent or your intent to be a resident in the US. So there is no minimum period of time by law that says you have to stay in the US, say 183 days a year, or you have to go back every 6 months. There's nothing that says that. The government just looks at your actions, which identify your intent. So, it's important that if you're going to spend significant time outside the US, that you discuss with, say, your immigration lawyer, for example, if it's me, about what your plans are, and then we can come up with a plan in order for you to maintain your residence, but still spend time outside the US. So in short, you need to understand the rules and how to maintain your residence. It's more difficult to obtain residence. It's easier to keep it once you have it. So you're not restricted to just staying in the US all the time, and I could help you with your plan.
I see. Okay. And one more question for David. Regarding the source of funds, would that be would the fund has to be from the US or has to be from outside the US?
Oh, your funds can come from anywhere.
Okay.
Yeah, and just since you asked the point, I will also add that we don't have to prove all of your money. There are some countries, for example, Canada, where you have to show your total wealth and how you obtained it. In the US, we only need to show the amount you're using for the investment. So that might be just, say, one property, and the rest of your wealth is unimportant.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay. Tam, you can raise a question, please.
Hello. Thank you, Tyrone, Georgina, David, for your sharing. I would like to have the question to David. Let's say like earlier in your presentation, you also say that US will like review the suit of fund. So if applicant got the gift from grandparent who is passed away, how applicant can prove the family gift or heritage from family? Those fund is legal and transparent for applicant of EB-5.
Very good question. Thank you for asking. So this would be through an inheritance. Like inheritance when a parent or some family member passes away and you receive some money from them, from their passing, right, from their estate. Well, then of course that would be eligible for the investment. You can use some of that money, but we would need to source how that family member came by obtaining that money or that asset, like that, for example, a home. Of course, if they're already passed, that may be more difficult because access to the documentation may be gone or may be limited. Now, Immigration Service, they will understand that it may be difficult. So in that sense, maybe it won't be as difficult for us as it seems like, because we won't be required to provide as much. And I can't really tell you exactly what we would need. I mean, I know how to investigate the case and ask about the documents. And that's where the experience, I think, is important to then understanding what is available and what we can show Immigration Service and what will they accept. So I can tell you that I've had cases like that and I've always had approvals. So, but I can't say that for sure until I start looking at a person's background and their family background.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. And I have the other question, but I don't know how Tyrone or you will help me to answer the question. Let's say like some country like Asia country like Vietnam or Indonesia or some certain country, they have like the government is like impose like restriction to moving out the foreign currency from their own country to US or the other country. So how you can like help or support the applicant can move out the money out of the country, because like the government very strict to restrict for the amount for foreign currency.
Yeah, that's a very important question. And, you know, and the regulations do change over time. We're currently working with one of the major, if we take the example of Vietnam, you know, we're currently working with one of the larger banks in Vietnam that can help transfer the money out legally and transparently. There's always a fee involved, of course, but we can use, you know, one of the major banks in Vietnam to help transfer out the money under certain circumstances. So, you know, because I think David will add to this too, that we have to be transparent. There has to be what's called the path of funds, not the source of funds, but the path. We have to be able to document how the money came from Vietnam, for example, to America. And there are ways to do it, and you know, we have a few different methods, and it always depends on a little bit on the person too, you know, on the family. But right now we are working with a big bank in Vietnam that can help with the transfers.
But has like what I understand and what I know is it quite complicated for process the bank, even like the big bank to have the people, the Vietnamese people to transfer money out.
Yes, it is.
But
that's what we're here for.
This is also affect for the time for like from your presentation is like it takes like 1 year for applicant can get the approval to get the green card for EB-5, but the process to transfer money out also like take so long. It's also affect the time for the applicant got approved. It means like extend longer. It's also make the applicant a bit like, how to say, they of course like everyone they want this program because fast, and then for the period to waiting is that take too long, is like they are not happy. So how we can convince them?
Well, we show them, right? I mean, we can do it. I mean, I guess that's where I'll leave it. There are ways to do it, and you know, we've been doing it for a lot of years. We've changed strategies a few times over the years, but it has to be legal and transparent, or else you know, David won't accept it. I mean, right, David? I mean, there has to be a very clear path of how the money moves from place to place.
Correct, yes. So we say source, we should say source and path of funds. As Tom has mentioned, you know, some countries have restrictive exchange and transfer laws like Vietnam. So it is a more difficult process, but you know, we are able to successfully do it. And yes, as Tom mentioned it, it may take a little more time.
But and I'd say that's one of the services that we'll use the example of Vietnamese or Chinese clients. That's one of the services that they appreciate the most sometimes, just being able to transfer funds, and you know, have overseas investments as well as the permanent residency.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, okay. I have another question here. It's for Tyrone. You know, this gentleman, Mr. Yusman, asking for the safety. You know, I think all the investors will ask about the safety of this project, you know, for the project investment. Will it be returned in 5 years, or could it be, you know, lost just like that? And because this kind of clinic has, you know, like a big operational expenses.
That's right. Yes. So, you know, I think it's one of the first lines in EB-5 law or regulations that your investment must be at risk. But I always say, you know, that doesn't mean that it has to be a risky investment. You know, the idea is that you are making an investment into a project, into a business. And there's always a certain amount of risk. So we try to minimize that by finding, you know, good partners and good investments. So with this particular project, you know, you are making an equity investment into the project, you and the other investors. So you have a certain amount of ownership over the business. So you know that you have a certain claim on the assets of the business in worst case scenarios. But you know, we don't, putting aside worst case scenarios, being able to repay your money even in 5 years. So the good thing about these businesses is that they open up quickly. You know, they're not like big hotels that take 2 or 3 years to build. You know, these 2 clinics will be opened up in, you know, January, February of 2022. And, you know, they start operating and generating revenue right away. And, you know, as I mentioned, you know, it's a very good stream of revenue because it's paid by the government. So very steady and consistent. And, you know, when we go through the business plan, and I'm happy to share that with you and go over it, the projections are pretty realistic, that they will generate enough money to repay the clients after 5 years. And again, these are professional companies, you know, and Kathy Ireland's $1 billion company. And the operation company has, you know, been doing, you know, has 45 of these clinics open already. So I would say, of course, there's always some risk. But, you know, if we want to talk about worst case scenarios, then, you know, the investors still have some claim over the assets of the project itself, you know, of the property and the buildings and the, you know, the equipment inside the buildings. So.
If I may add one thing, from the legal requirement for EB-5, the law specifically says the investment must be at risk. And what this means is the businesses or projects that want to receive EB-5 money are not allowed to provide any kind of guarantee that the investor would receive their money back. They can only create their investment documents so that the investors are protected as best as possible, and can receive money back if the business is successful. So that would apply to any investment for EB-5.
Right.
Okay, thank you, Tyrone and David. I have another question here from Vinci Laurencia. Okay, if we already have ongoing green card petition through family line, but not yet heard any result, can we also submit EB-5 petition at the same time? David? You're muted.
Can you repeat that?
Yes, if we already, this participant, if we've already have ongoing green card petition through family line, but not yet heard any result, can we also submit the EB-5 petition at the same time?
Yes, that is fine. You can do that. And we expect that a petition would be approved, and well, if the expedite in this project is approved for an investor, then that could be as quick as 3 months or less. If the expedite is not approved, then maybe 4 to 6 months, or within a year. And then depending on how right now, because of COVID, the US consulates are not operating as efficiently. So it might normally take 3 to 4 months to have your interview. Now it might take longer, but realistically, within a year and a half or 2 years, you could have your visas and go to the US and become residents. So some family categories, especially brothers and sisters of US citizens, could still take 15 years or longer. So if you're in one of those categories where there's a long wait for a visa, then an EB-5, would be quicker probably.
Okay, is there any more questions? Oh, wait, one more. Last questions. Oh, okay, that's clear. Okay, well, here my number. I've already mentioned my number here.
Yeah, and
here is my number, and you can contact me via WhatsApp. And I think, okay, Tyrone, you have something to say?
oh, I just wanted to say
wrap it
thanks,
up?
just to remind everyone that I'm in Vietnam right now, so I'm in the same time zone. So if you want to have a one-on-one call, that's fine with me, and we can do it at your convenience. And David being in Taipei is only 1 hour difference, so it's very easy to kind of get us all together. And we're almost in the same time zones. It's very easy to get together for a one-on-one if you want a more detailed discussion of your situation.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for joining this webinar. Thank you, David and Tyrone, for this morning session, and hope to see you soon. And I will do follow up to you. And this webinar is recorded, so I will send it to you after being edited. Okay. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you, everyone.
Great. Have a great day.
Bye.
Thank you, Georgina, Tyrone.